All right, so just before we get started, I wanted to let you know we're not going to be sifting through a lot of security jargon and technical specifics. We're here to discuss, in layman's terms, the concepts and components of managing IT risk. When we talk about IT risks, we're actually talking about a broad, many-faceted landscape that can have many iterations. But more than that, it's constantly changing. That's why there's no handy recipe to identify and mitigate threats. Not only is your configuration undergoing constant change, but also the hazards are constantly changing. The trick is to implement processes and systems that will alert you to dangers so that you can figure out which ones are most damaging to your business and realize security measures to mitigate, to minimize, or eradicate those threats. In this way, a stable, protected network requires not only risk prevention, but also resilience planning to successfully navigate today's IT atmosphere.
Certainly, we see identifying risk as top priority for a lot of nonprofit organizations as the threat landscape is evolving and changing. More and more we hear of stories around how vulnerabilities have impacted several organizations. And today we will learn a few tricks and we'll learn a few vehicles of those risks.
All right, so let's talk about some of the things that jeopardize your network. No matter how big your umbrella is, depending on which way the wind is blowing, you're still going to get a little wet, right? I said we wouldn't use jargon, but malicious outsider is such a succinct way to say nefarious attackers and other threats from the World Wide Web. I just couldn't resist. These terms here, hacking, ransomware, these are talking about methods and means of intrusion a malicious outsider might use for various hostile and damaging purposes. Generally, I expect you are familiar with these, but let's just clarify a few. Software vulnerability refers to a security flaw, glitch, or weakness found in software or in an operating system that can lead to security concerns. Once aware, software vendors typically will develop a fix and send it out or make it available for consumers to install. This is important. They don't necessarily send it. Sometimes you have to go to their site and find it. Unauthorized backdoors are a method that hackers use to establish unauthorized access to a network from a remote location. Altered data attack is where an attacker modifies, reroutes, or deletes your data after gaining access. Besides catastrophic events such as natural disaster, hardware failure, or application error, we must also guard against internal security failures like simple breach of policy. Known as shadow IT, sometimes well-meaning staff open accounts or sign up for software without the knowledge or endorsement of the IT crew or anyone else. And now you have a security vulnerability that no one in a position to mitigate it even knows about. Or maybe you're a small company with just a few employees, so everyone has admin rights on the network, and someone needed access, so an employee sent a username and password in plain text without encryption through email. Now an attacker could have full access to the network, and you might not even know if they have stolen or altered data. Security by obscurity is no good defense. Even small companies can be exploited.
Yeah, I want to emphasize the malicious outsider. You know, there's this trend that we see organizations adopting cloud technologies, and certainly there are risks associated with cloud services, and this sort of attacks we would encourage organizations to look carefully as they select cloud solutions. They really need to assess the risk or have a good understanding of the types of risks that could be associated with those cloud services and types of attacks that have been coming up as a result of the evolution of cloud services. Now we'll take a deep dive and kind of highlight rather the potential impacts of this risks that was mentioned. Eva?
Yeah, so just for a second, let's review what a breach of security could mean to your business. To be clear, any of these impacts in the top row can result in any or all of the impacts in the bottom row. Let's say your file storage device fails catastrophically, and you don't happen to have a swappable device on hand, just in case. You're going to lose time, productivity, and money getting back up to speed. If this is a failure of the device itself, but the warranty or support agreement has lapsed, then your device is not a top priority for the vendor, and/or you have to pay out of pocket for the replacement parts, plus extra for fast shipment. Then you need a technician who can rescue the data and configuration, if possible, and load it up on the new device. And then, if this impacts customer or member's ability to access your services, your reputation may take a hit. It's like a stack of cards. Take one out and the whole thing collapses.
Hmm. Yeah, it's really interesting looking at potential impacts because I think we all can relate to loss of productivity, the reputation. Some can even attribute it to financial costs because in fact you may say, hey, no amount of money would save me or will pay for what I've lost. So it's actually looking at the risks and keeping this potential risk impacts in mind would help us kind of understand how to properly identify the risks. Next up, we will take a look at assessment areas. So rather, we'll look at the layers of protection before heading into discussing the assessment areas.
Right, thanks, Nora. So in a perfect world, you would have a top-down approach where senior management sets the business requirements for IT. They can create a culture of ownership and responsibility in the company so that IT is truly owned by the organization. They can fund, authorize, and ensure true adoption of the security guidelines. IT management interprets these goals in order to deploy and implement IT systems and solutions. They produce and deliver training, design and test business continuity and recovery plans, execute or source detailed audits of the IT environment. Excuse me. In this foundation, on this foundation, decisions about network connectivity, physical devices, and information systems can be made. Does the organization have a lot of cloud systems in place or a majority of staff accessing local resources remotely? Perhaps a secondary internet connection is warranted.
Yes, and if you can take the first two, IT governance and IT management, into consideration, you can classify them as administrative control. They are interrelated. If you classify also the network connectivity, physical device, and information system into a group, you may call them technical controls in security. They all should be interrelated. The decisions that IT governance make provides guidance around what IT management should implement and the technical controls that are put in place for connectivity, physical devices, and information systems should all connect back to that governance and strategy that the IT governance provides as a layer of protection. So uh, now we can focus on some key area of assessments. And Eva, can you walk us through this four areas and why are they significant? Eva? Okay. It looks like Eva might be having some technical. Are you back, Eva?
Yeah, thanks, Nora.
Okay.
So basically, we just took a look at what goes into um, an IT environment. We sort of divided it up into some logical segments,
Mm-hmm.
and you see here we've got some basic clues about what is contained in those quadrants. In the following slides, we're going to go more in depth in each quadrant.
Okay. All right.
So connectivity, pretty much every business these days needs some sort of connection to the internet. Uh, it varies a lot between organizations, how much uh, bandwidth you might need, for example. But the main goal is you should assess your internet connection, your business processes, make sure that the service is adequate for what you're trying to do, and the connection is stable. If your internet drops out with some frequency, you may want to have a secondary internet connection that you can fail over onto so that you don't, for example, lose connection to that cloud application that everybody uses all the time. You just really want to make sure your business continuity requirements are met. Additionally, with wireless, you know, fairly straightforward. You want to make sure that the access is secure. With guest access, you don't want that to be wide open either. You want it to be secure, but in addition, you want it to be separated from your business resources. So you don't have, you know, Joe the janitor able to jump on your network and access your files. In terms of being able to for your staff to be able to access the wireless, you got to make sure you have enough access points for coverage. You want the network to be seamless and perform well enough that people can get their work done.
Wonderful. And I would emphasize here, the need for us to take a close look at the core infrastructure, networking infrastructure. These are primarily switches and firewall. With switches, we've seen organizations within the local area networks have managed switches that have some sort of a segmentation between the data network and the voice network. That separation also provides a protection there against risks or any vulnerability that may be harmful to the local area network where your data is. The voice network can also be separated using this type of managed switches. One common device that you see across a variety of networks that we support and networks that are in office space environment is the firewall. We keep hearing about this firewall, this device. It's really core to integral to the connectivity on the network. Some organizations have firewalls that are providing a whole host of services, but it's a critical device. An organization that does not have a firewall may have some sort of a cable modem or a router that is provided by their internet service provider that is allowing traffic basically going between the internal network and that is trying to access services that are on the internet. So that firewall provides some perimeter security there. With the firewall, because of the services that it's running, two important things have to be ensured by organizations. Firewall that has the latest firmware that is installed. Firmware installation has to do with the support that is provided by the vendor, and also the types of security patches that is released to plug in any holes that may be on the firmware. Every now and then, the vendor essentially goes in and reviews patches. Think of it as updates that you install on your workstations. Firewall and switches, they also have updates that should be installed. Likewise, the wireless access point that Eva mentioned earlier. So connectivity is important and it's integral to a network. And these are three key areas where risks can be identified and can be safeguards can be put in place. Next up, we would move on to security and spend a little bit of time talking about four areas, but I will start by highlighting backups. Here we emphasize managed backup because managed backup provides a, a solution that looks at backing up your servers, cloud systems, email, and any other critical infrastructure that you may have on your network or you're hosting offsite as well. When you have a robust backup solution, you have some safeguard against potential risks of losing your data or losing information on any of the systems that you might have. In addition to backup, restoration process and viability is tested regularly. That has to be in place. Otherwise, good backup without having a restoration process may not be as effective. You want to test the integrity of the data that is being backed up, ensuring that it's not corrupted. Assuming you go months doing a backup, or you spend 2 years on a backup solution, but you've never restored the data over that or data over that period of time, how are you guaranteed that the restoration will be effective? You could restore data 6 months, 6 months old. So that's just an example, but what the point here is just to ensure that you have some guidance around restoring your data, and you do that routinely or periodically over time. With a managed backup solution, typically there is a two component to it. Some managed backup solutions that have big infrastructure, that are backing up big infrastructure. A local backup uh, is recommended, highly recommended for that quick restoration needs. And then the icing on the cake is really this offsite component where, in case of a disaster, you really have a safeguard. You know your data is stored somewhere in a data center, but it's protected, and you can fail over to retrieving your information from that offsite backup. Uh, Business continuity really has to do with thinking through your business requirements. There is this concept of recovery point objective and recovery time objective. How much time can you afford to lose? How much time can you afford to How much time can you afford to lose without your data? How much productivity lost loss are you willing to take? It's really critical that you look at your business requirement. You can say, I can't do 1 week without having access to my information. So I need to have a backup solution that will be able to allow me to continue running my business even in the event of a disaster, and with a recovery time of maybe 8 hours or 4 hours, something realistic, something that you can afford, something that meets your business requirements. So, and there are a whole host of managed backup solutions out there that are available, and certainly community IT would be happy to discuss your business requirements and see what solution makes sense. Yeah, do you want to touch upon antivirus?
Yeah, thanks, Nora. Definitely being able to recover data to be able to get back up and running within a certain amount of time is a very important consideration for any business. Another important consideration is preventing malicious attack and making sure that your systems are running well. So, patching and antivirus, very important. You need to not only have an antivirus system in place, but you need to make sure that the definitions are being updated regularly. In fact, these days we definitely recommend a multi-layered approach um, to security. You want to not just have antivirus. You want to have spam filtering on your email, for example. You want to have web filtering to help protect your staff while they're surfing the internet. Um, and definitely keeping all your systems patched and up to date is very important to business productivity.
It's interesting. You mentioned patching here with the workstation. Uh, in particular, if you have an office environment where you run Macs or Apple MacBooks, um, some may wonder, are there antivirus solutions? Yes, there are antivirus solutions, but uh, really with systems like Apple, the most important uh, kind of security safeguard you could put in place is to ensure that those Macs are being patched, because Apple routinely releases some security patches for their operating system, and it's quite important to take a look at that and have a good patching for your Macs. This is in addition to patching for Windows if you do have Windows environments. But just wanted to emphasize for Macs, I know questions do come up with Macs. There are antivirus solutions, but a multi-layered approach really provides a better protection than just having a dedicated antivirus without patching uh, your operating systems. Uh, we continue on our discussions on security by looking at remote access. Uh, Remote access, think of it as remote access to resources that you may be hosting somewhere, either on-premise or in the cloud. You want to have some secure way of connecting remotely to those services. and it should be also at a monitored, audited remote access capability. So things like if you have a VPN that allows you with a virtual private network connection that creates a secure tunnel for you to your resource, you want to make sure that that VPN technology that you're using is one that is known to have good security around it, based on industry standards. Um, and also, if you are monitoring that remote access connection, you want to be able to have detailed logs. So if someone attempts to connect to your resource remotely, you're able to have some way of detecting that attempt, and in a way put some preventive mechanism in place to either disable the account that they're trying to attempting to log in multiple times without any success, or even put in alerts to see how you can secure the connection itself. So remote access is another area that presents risks as if although it provides this ease of connectivity to resources. I could work from home, but having a layer of protection there really helps with reducing the risks that could be that could we do see given remote access to resources. Eva, what about accounts and password? I almost feel there is some connection there.
Yes, definitely there's some connection. When we talk about accounts and passwords, we're talking about a few different things. One is management of accounts. We're talking about onboarding and offboarding staff and the processes that are involved, making sure that people have the right level of access to resources at the right time, making sure that when somebody leaves that account is flagged for to be closed down.
Hmm.
And it's not just one account. We have a lot of different systems in use. We don't always have single sign-on, but even then, on the back end, you're going to go in and disable that account when somebody leaves. You're going to transfer those files to a secure location, and you're going to remove those just to make sure that, if a hacker gets in, that they're not going to be able to use that account to do nefarious things on your network. Uh, I touched on it, but another consideration is making sure that people don't have more privileges than what they need. This is just another layer so that if somebody gets in, um, they're not able to do more than that account has access to. So making sure
Mm.
that your admins are the only people with admin access, and in fact that maybe that they're only getting access at the time they need it. These are ways. Another example is multi-factor authentication. These are just some of the barriers that we can put in the way of malicious outsiders. Password policies, very, very important. Not just having a policy, but making sure that it's adhered to. Not just having complex passwords, but also having them expire on a set schedule. Um, multi-factor authentication, I touched on that. These are all very important aspects to managing the security of accounts and passwords. Um,
One.
yes, did you have a comment?
Yeah, because when you say complex passwords, sometimes there is a struggle there. Complex password. Can I use any dictionary word? Can I use my date of birth? There is some connection there typically when we think of generating a password. But when you say complex password, I've seen some of these tools that generate passwords for you, and they are highly complex. It's hard to memorize those kind of passwords. So what are some of the minimum requirements that constitutes a complex password? What do you mean by that?
Well, I'm not sure if this directly answers your question or not, but uh, you know, the the computers that folks are using to crack passwords, they're not thinking, oh, Jennifer, she really likes wine. I bet she uses wine for her password. Let me try a few of those. That computer has a whole bunch of data loaded into it, and it is just trying like everything in a list really fast. So that's
Mhm.
why it's so important to have a password that doesn't resemble a dictionary word, that uses capitals, lowercase, numbers, symbols, that sort of thing, and to change it with some frequency. Can you
Excellent.
elaborate any more on that, Nora?
Yes, I think yeah, it makes sense, just to have a mixed bag of sort of multiple characters and perhaps at least I would say, no fewer than 8 characters. In fact, these days some of the services for cloud services they have a password requirement. If it's not up to 8 characters, it tells you it doesn't accept it or it shows you that it's very weak. And but certainly what you've mentioned here in terms of complexities should drive home the idea of generating a password that has some length to it and has some combination of characters that is tough to guess or tough to brute force using a list, for instance. Right, let's move along here and talk about devices. I know we highlighted some devices earlier on uh, when we talked about connectivity, specifically focusing on wireless and some of the networking infrastructure here. We talked about switches and firewall. But in this section, we are focused about the hardware that you find in your office environment on your network. You would find routers, you would find storage devices, network attached storage where your data is stored. And primarily what we are trying to drive home here, the message here is to reduce the risk on that network is to ensure performance is stable, age is within an expected lifespan. So if you have a device that is, let's say, a storage, or I would use an example of firewall. Let's say you have a firewall that is 5 years old. You were in 2016, you bought it in 2011, for instance. Uh, in 2016 now there are firewalls that have evolved. Sometimes the manufacturers or the vendors tend to keep up with technology, so as much as possible phase out old equipment. 5 years is sufficient time to start thinking of what else is out there to replace my firewall. With so the expected lifespan is just a duration of use. You want to be able to make sure that the device that you have, you are not squeezing the life out of it. Yes, at some point in time it's going to die. And sometimes the manufacturers even refuse to provide any support agreements because of the age has exceeded or they've discontinued that specific or particular device that you have on your network. In addition to that, keeping the support warranty agreement between the vendor for the device with the vendor allows you to install the latest or to have access rather to the latest firmware, and that in turn gives you the best patches that they have for their to secure the device. In
That's right.
addition to that, yeah,
Yeah.
yeah, yeah. In addition to that, uninterruptible power supply is one device that it's almost common in any server room that you walk into. We famously see it in server room, but in other, believe it or not, in other organizations across the world, they have UPSs for their workstations. But here in the United States, more or less, we have fewer power outages. But still, regardless of the power frequency of power outages, we need to have backup battery. Eva, do you want to share from experience and example some of the points here that we're trying to drive home with UPSs?
Yeah, so UPS, it's not necessarily meant to run your network on. If your power supply tends to have a lot of blips, it's definitely a good idea to have a UPS. You don't want things shutting down every 5 minutes, so it can help you bridge that. But more likely you have longer power outages, like during a storm. UPS gives you time to gracefully shut things down so you don't use data. That is their primary objective, as well as protecting your equipment from surges, electrical surges. I remember someone telling me recently about a story. One of their clients, the the building had a UPS, their server room had a UPS. The building was actually struck by lightning. It blew out both UPSs, but the equipment, the UPS was saved by both of those UPS devices. And so, just not having to replace all that equipment or repair it, that is a huge savings for a small and low tech solution. Get a UPS, plug your devices into it. Those things, they'll last a while. Nora was talking about 5 years as kind of a good rule of thumb. There's a little variation with different kinds of devices of how quickly they age out, but 5 is pretty much the middle of the road. And the same with UPSs. Once they've been in service for a certain amount of time, you want to go ahead and replace them. You can configure some UPSs with to gracefully shut down your servers automatically, and that's really useful. You can configure them to notify you if your server room is getting too hot for your servers. You can configure that, and that's really handy as well. So definitely uninterruptible power supply is a good investment to secure your network from those kinds of risks.
Excellent points there, Eva. When you look at devices, you cannot escape the fact that, we deal with servers, end users have workstations, and copiers, and a whole host of end user devices as well. But for servers, active monitoring of those servers and workstations is essential, more or less essential these days, because active monitoring means some sort of an agent that is basically looking at the performance of the different types of different components of the server, and that active monitoring allows for some sort of proactive remediation or reactive remediation. The monitoring of servers these days is very crucial. Gone are the days where you just have a server and you turn it on, and as long as you can connect it, that's fine. But having a proactive way to monitor the activities and predicting disk failures before they happen, and putting a remediation mechanism in place does help minimize the risk of data loss or your servers going down. Workstation too, you could argue that workstation monitoring, there are times when your disk, you may not be aware, you might be syncing your Dropbox to your locally to your workstation, but you may not have sufficient disk space. And running out of disk space may begin to show some deterioration in performance of your workstation. So with active monitoring, there are tools that would alert you or alert those IT professionals or vendors that are monitoring your workstation to be proactive about cleaning out spaces, disk space, or if any other component is dying or has a defect to it. Active monitoring allows for that proactive
That's right.
remediation to take
That's
place.
right. You don't have to wait for it to be impacting your business productivity before you can address the concern. That's what's so great about active monitoring. Sorry to cut you
Mhm.
off there, Nora.
No, no cut off you, and I agree with that as well. And life expectancy here is just a reminder, servers should be up to date, should have a warranty support agreement with them. There is value. Even if you're saying, "Hey, you know what, with our workstations, it's the business, we may keep a warranty for workstation for the executives or those people that travel, but really having them under warranty saves you a lot of time and productivity and cost as well. So we want to just emphasize the need for us to uh, look at these devices as critical to the operations of our network. If we want them to run smoothly, we want to take these things into consideration. Eva, I know you mentioned that you had some point around mobile devices that you because you see, just bring your own devices. People having all sorts of mobile devices. What would you like to add to mobile devices here?
Yeah, so certainly if you're providing your staff with phones and tablets, you would want to have some kind of central management on those devices so that you can wipe them remotely and keep track of who has what. Uh, and additionally, if folks are bringing their own devices, using their own devices in your workspace, you want to have some policies around uh, how you approved ways to use those devices. For example, you might want them to make sure that they're locking it with a password, for example. Um, I don't know anybody who has a cell phone that doesn't have a password on it, but I'm sure there are plenty out there. It is pretty risky if somebody gets a hold of your cell phone and you've got all your passwords saved for automatically accessing work resources. All of a sudden, whoever picks up your phone has access to all of that, and your 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 contacts and everything. So making sure that mobile devices are centrally managed or you have some way to wipe them remotely is very important.
Solid. I couldn't agree anymore. I think this was it's really I'm just looking at my mobile device right now and just making sure that my pin is solid. I know that here at Community IT we have applied a device policy to all our end user devices. So if I want email on my phone, it has to be approved by the I have to have a password to sign into my device, and also the system administrator in-house has to approve my device so that we know exactly who connects to what device. Uh, if you don't have any device policy, I could sync up my email to my personal devices, my iPad, my other tablets, and other computers without having any security audits, and that presents a risk altogether. So it will be worthwhile for organizations to begin to think about how to develop their own BYOD policy. All right, so next up we're going to talk about the information system. This is the last piece of information system and assessment area that we will emphasize. Email. We all use email. Organizations rely on email heavily. It's a critical application, a critical communication infrastructure. So in order to reduce the risk on email, one area is to have some sort of a anti-spam or filtering service that reduces the amount of malicious emails that are being exchanged or sent through the email infrastructure. If your organization, most of the email platforms that we see these days, the common ones, the Google Mail, they have their own built-in spam filtering. Office 365 has its own, but you can also add another layer of spam filtering that allows for extra layer protection against email threats. Backups, so, emailing backup. It's actually a good thing to have. It's not enough to just have retention. So you may say, "Oh, I archive my email. We have unlimited storage. I don't ever delete my emails." But the provider of your email service, they have limitation around the amount of data they can store for you. They may have some requirements around backup. They may say backup. They can only restore backup that is 30 days old. Anything older, you have to look at a third-party email backup solution. So considering email backup is good. If you are hosting email in-house on premise, having a solid email backup solution, it's even far more important than even the hosted solutions that you have out there, because your email is all in one place on your servers in-house on premise. If the on-premise server or database is corrupted, you need to be able to have a way to restore your service. If you're on in the cloud, you also need to think about third-party solutions that would back up your email. More and more these days, we are seeing it's secure communication requests. You want to exchange something that would prevent an attacker from sniffing your email communication. So encrypting your data would be a next extra solution that will secure your email exchange. Email encryption is available these days, and it's worth considering and looking at the variety of solutions that are out there. But not to say email that we send is not secure, but encrypting it allows for that extra protection and guards against a man-in-the-middle attack. Uh, for files, Eva, do you want to shed some light on files?
Sure. First, I just want to clarify man in the middle. That's just referring to somebody who like grabs that email communication before it gets to its destination and basically peels open the container. They can grab the content without either end user realizing it. That's what a man in the middle attack is referring to. And certainly encryption means that they might be able to get that file attachment, but they can't do anything with it because it's encrypted. So that's very important for any sensitive information that you're sending through email. Office some levels of Office 365 include encryption, not all of them, so you want to check that out. And then we do have a third-party solution that we use at Community IT, so we can certainly provide some information on that if you're interested. For files, this only has one bullet point. It looks pretty straightforward. What we're talking about is some method that simplifies the management of the file system so that we have one place that we need to back up, one place that we need to restore to, and one platform that we need to maintain. So when we talk about about files, that's what we're talking about. If we have stuff, on a local server, we have stuff on Amazon, we have stuff on Dropbox, and everywhere else, then it becomes very difficult to make sure that we have the most recent file, that we have the ability to restore any data that's needed. Nora, do you want to talk to us about business applications?
Oh yeah, well sure. It's a business application. Here it says critical application. So a lot of nonprofit organizations have some critical application that they rely on, either for fundraising or membership enrollment. These applications need to be patched routinely and up to date. And at least there should be some support agreement between the client and the application provider, in this case the vendor, just to ensure that the best security patches are installed and those applications are getting the latest updates that are coming from the vendor. In addition, the platform where on which you run these applications, whether it's hosted platform or in-house servers. I imagine you have a 2003 Windows server, which is old and has been discontinued. Microsoft does not longer support it, but you have this critical application that's run on that server. That platform is at risk. The application is also at risk. So really looking at the platform that you run this application is very, very important, and you want to ensure that that platform is run in an optimal condition on a server that is supported, that is connected properly, that has sufficient bandwidth to run your application. That way your end users or the customers or clients that you're providing services to, those members see that your service is actually helping you achieve your missions, and the business applications are run efficiently and optimally. So I think we're almost at time, and it would be a good way to summarize here, Eva.
Check it out. We made it to the summary.
Yeah, okay.
So, there is a lot of detail. There's a lot more detail that we could go into in exploring what makes a risk and how you can find it, how you can mitigate against it. But if you're only going to be able to remember a couple of things from this presentation, here you go. In a nutshell, what we think is so important at the very basic is backups, not just for local systems, but cloud systems as well. Include your email system. If you don't have backups, you can't restore. And you may think, well, it'll never happen to me, but it could. uh, Next, password policy, not just having a policy, a good strong policy, but also making sure that it's fully adopted throughout the organization. Um, it does no good to have a policy that nobody adheres to. Next, multi-layered approach to security. You want to have antivirus, sure. You want to make sure your systems are patched, sure. You also want to have, web filtering and email filtering. These are simple things that you can apply to help just shield you from being a low-hanging fruit to those malicious attackers. Next, it's not enough to just have a backup. You want to make sure it works. You want to make sure that it's restoring the critical data you need. So test it. Test. See if you can restore the data and access use the systems that you need. And finally, get a detailed audit gives you so much information about where your IT environment is. And if you're just getting started, get an audit. This is a great way to you're doing a great job with some windows, into your organization, and it gives you all I've got. Nora,
Yeah,
any
yeah.
additional comments here?
Well, actually, I agree with all this five takeaways, and I would also emphasize this detailed audit. If you're starting out the first time, you want to assess your network. It will help you identify those risks. And once you have that audit, what do you do with it? Then you begin to plan. You should have a remediation plan in place, and from that remediation plan, you'll be able to identify what are the highest risk. If I don't have all the money in the world, so we don't have all the money in the world, but if I were to invest my money intelligently, we want to identify the highest places of risk and put our investments in there. So certainly an audit is a good place to start. So I would urge you all to uh, take this takeaway home, take it back to your organizations, to your leaders, to your IT pros, and to your IT vendors, and kind of ask questions and see how you can get them implemented to safeguard against the risks evolving and the risks that we are seeing on networks these days. Thank you all for joining us. Eva, any other comments?
I think that covers it for me. Thanks. Did we have any?
Yeah, so I will pass it on to Johan to tell us about the next webinar.
Yeah, thank you both very much. That was fantastic. Another excellent webinar in our series. And we'll have time for some questions in a minute here. We have a number of questions that we want to get to. But before we do that, we just wanted to let you know that the webinar series continues in November. So on November 17th, the third Thursday of November, our Director of IT Consulting, Steve Longenecker, is going to be talking about Dropbox and trying to help you answer the question, is Dropbox your next file server? And Dropbox is by no means a universal solution, but there are definitely cases where it makes a lot of sense. And we're going to talk about that and kind of talk through the pros and cons and sort of caveats to look out for if you're considering Dropbox. A couple final tips. When you leave the webinar, you're going to receive a pop-up window with a short survey. We really appreciate your feedback. It means a lot to us, and we use that feedback every month to improve the webinar series. So please take time to answer that survey. If you missed anything at all, we're going to email you a link to the slides, which are hosted on our SlideShare account, as well as the recording, which will be hosted on our YouTube channel. And please connect with us after the webinar. You can find us on Facebook. You can go like our Facebook page. We have our YouTube channel, as I mentioned. We will post things to our LinkedIn account, and you can follow the blog on our website. So, with that being said, let's move on to the questions, and we've got a number of questions for you, and we've got about 10 minutes left to try to get these questions answered. So, first question, what's sort of the lifespan of a switch or a router? You had mentioned pretty early on in the presentation, you want to look out for old switches and routers. What's the lifespan you should expect from a switch or a router, and how can you find out what the age of a router is or a switch?
Yeah, typically, 5 years, you want to be starting to think about replacing that switch or that router. Different vendors, you would look it up in a different way for a different vendor, so depending on the brand. But typically, you can look it up using the serial number on the device. You just go to the vendor's web page, and typically you can find a tool that they have there to look it up.
Yeah,
All right.
I would add that. I would add a comment here. Just when you're looking at the switch and the switch in particular, the speed of the switch is very important these days. So when you're trying to replace a 5-year-old, for instance, switch, besides the age and the lifespan of 5 years, you would really look at the speed as well of that switch. And typically, the vendor that you may be considering would have a variety of options for you.
Yep, and one thing I would add is that you really want to be proactive in replacing your networking equipment, particularly switches and routers, because they have a tendency to kind of go bad in unpredictable and difficult to troubleshoot ways. And so you may have one staff person whose computer suddenly is getting disconnected randomly, or they're just having, random corruption or funny issues. And, a month later, after a lot of troubleshooting and frustration, it turns out that the port on the switch went bad. And that, you see that starting to happen with switches that are older than 5 years. So it's a good idea to be proactive about replacing those switches.
Yeah, I've definitely seen that happen, Johan. Thanks for adding that. I've definitely seen that happen more than once.
Yeah. Related to that, another great question from a different audience member is how do you handle situations with, smaller organizations that maybe don't have a server room, in their office. And so you want to secure the network equipment. You don't want just random people coming in and, unplugging it and disrupting network connectivity. But you also need to make sure that, in those cases, non-technical staff, maybe, the office manager, has the ability to go and kind of cycle the power if there's a problem with the internet connection, or, perform other on-site troubleshooting steps. What are some ways that you've seen people kind of secure equipment in that environment?
Right. Well, for small organizations, definitely they have a need for connectivity. They have a need to access the internet. For equipment that is in-house, typically you may find that there is a firewall, maybe sometimes a router. If it's a small organization, they are not hosting anything in-house, they don't have a server room, they may invest in a small cabinet that is lockable, so you have physical protection or physical control there, or put it in a place where it's not exposed to any hazards, ensuring that there isn't any way for someone to easily kind of gain access to that device, or spill. It's not close to the tap or something. So it's in a cabinet somewhere, locked and well ventilated. So that I've seen. Also, the documentation of that network is very important. This is where you would need to partner with an IT professional, either an IT vendor that provides that is able to document your network and tell you where things are. That way, the IT manager, or even if they don't have an IT manager or an office manager, is able to take that documentation and can walk through and understands the where the critical connections are on the network, because there are probably wires that should be labeled. So based on that documentation, labeling is going to be done properly. And partnering with an IT vendor helps a small organization understand those critical components and how to secure them properly.
All right, great. Let's see, we got another question about UPSs. Is it important to replace the entire UPS, or is it okay to just replace the battery?
I would say, like with anything, it's undergoing wear and tear. Um, you wouldn't want to use the old wires that connect internet to your house that have been there for 15 years. You'd want them to run a new wire from the source to your house. The things flow better, and you're not going to have uh, weird surprises like you would with an old switch. Uh, so I would say, replacing the battery is fine up to about, 6 years or so, maybe 7, and then you want to probably replace the whole UPS.
Great. I'm actually going to field the next question because I have a little bit of experience with it. So it's who would you recommend to do an IT security audit, and how much would you expect to pay for it? And I think this is something that really runs the gamut. I think in general, in our experience, um, the best IT security audits are generally kind of driven by some sort of outside force. So, for example, we have a client who provides healthcare services, and so they're subject to the regulations of HIPAA. And as part of that, they were essentially, as part of their funding, required to demonstrate HIPAA compliance, and that required them to get an IT security audit. But they went with a firm that did an IT security audit that was specifically focused on
Mm-hmm.
HIPAA compliance. And so I think I've seen $2,000 IT security audits. I've seen quotes for $5,000 IT security audits. I've seen quotes for 10, 35, 50, 80. It really kind of runs the gamut. And, the most basic ones are just sort of an elemental sort of risk assessment. The more advanced ones tend to be related to some kind of regulation or compliance requirements like HIPAA, and then the most expensive tend to involve white hat hacking or
Mm-hmm.
penetration testing, where the goal is really to try to hack into the system itself. So it really kind of depends on what level of security audit you're looking for, and depending on the level and kind of the need, that will affect both the cost and the firm that it makes sense to kind of work with. If the goal is really to just kind of do a basic sort of a basic what are some of the most you know normal or standard threats we might be facing, then I think just doing it within the context of an overall technology assessment is probably sufficient.
Excellent.
And the last question, we have time for one last question. Um, uh, the question is, I'm skeptical of requiring frequent password changes, and my experience is that this just results in more post-it notes or slips of paper. Any thoughts on kind of the latest thinking on the frequency of password changes? And I'm happy to offer my thoughts on this one as well. I think certainly the orthodoxy 10 years ago, even 5 years ago, was change your passwords frequently and often, and that generally was mandated for most of us through Active Directory. If we're on a Microsoft network, the Microsoft network is requiring us to, if the network is set up per Microsoft's best practices, we're changing those passwords on a regular basis. There are a variety of reasons for that. If you travel and you're potentially vulnerable to having your data sniffed, or let's say you're using a computer that has a keylogger installed on it, at some point along the way, your password is going to be obtained, and then at that point, your password is compromised. And this really gets back to what Eva had mentioned earlier in the webinar. These days, most attempts at password hacking involve dictionary attacks, and basically, you hear about these high-profile compromises or data breaches where Dropbox or Yahoo or basically everyone at one point or another has had their system hacked and a list of passwords taken. And essentially, once those passwords are decrypted, they get added to, kind of the massive sort of dictionary of known passwords that hackers can use. And because of the increase in computing power over the last 15 years, it's very easy to kind of take that massive list of passwords and, run it against an account to hack into it. So, part of the theory behind changing the password is the password you're using at one time may be compromised now, and if you change your password regularly, then you're kind of one step ahead of that dictionary attack. Um,
Yeah.
the counter philosophy, which has become more and more common over the last 5 years or so, is that every time you change your password, you're making it more challenging for end users to use their password. And so you are leading to, like the attendee mentioned, more post-it notes. But then you're also you're running the password over the wire, more frequently. If you're changing your password on a website that's compromised, now they've got your new password. There's just some value to sitting tight with your password. So I think there's kind of arguments can be made for both not changing passwords ever again and changing
Mm-hmm.
them frequently. And I think actually the real solution is probably one that you had mentioned a little bit earlier, Nura, and that's using a password management tool that can generate a strong random password that's very unlikely to be part of a dictionary. And then once you set your password with that, once you use the password manager to set your password, then you don't ever have to change it again. And you're, not only not worrying about having to change it, but you're also confident that it's not a password that's, out in the wild, so to speak. So I think increasingly there's been a trend towards using password management tools, both individually and within organizations, as a way of, kind of securing the password environment.
Yeah, actually, that was that's actually an excellent description of this issue. A lot of security professionals have made a living developing this password management software and solutions. I've recently met a client that told me she had over 200 passwords, uh, but the password manager has helped her organize her password and manage the variety of passwords she needs to deal with. So maybe that's overstated, but these tools they need some getting used to, but they can come handy once you get the hang of it.
Yep. Yep. Great. Well, thank you both again. That was a fantastic webinar. I appreciate you taking some time out of your day to share your knowledge with us all, and appreciate everyone who took time out of their day to join our webinar. And we look forward to your joining us next month for our Dropbox webinar. Have a great afternoon,
Awesome.
everyone.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thanks.